Are you suffering from low self-esteem or self-doubt? Then this next video could be for you. Welcome back to the MindStrong Edge. Today's letter is from a gentleman who is exhausted. There's a lot going on in his life. Can't quite put his finger on it. There is a sense of self-esteem issues, and we're going to get right into it. He says, "Dear MindStrong Edge, I've been feeling out of sorts lately and thought I might reach out. Things have been building up for a while now and I can't quite put my finger on what's going wrong. But something's definitely off. Life is busy, like it always is, with work and family, but I keep running into the same problems and starting to feel overwhelmed." Okay, let's talk about work. At work, I'm always doing my best, but no matter what I achieve, it never feels like enough. My bosses seem to expect more and more. Even though I'm hitting targets and working hard, I feel like they're constantly watching, waiting for me to slip up. It's exhausting. Yes, it is. Now, I don't think, I did have a read through this. I don't think you actually say how old you are or what it is that you actually do for work. So it would be great to have that information to work on, but we can carry on without that information today. Yes, the work landscape has changed. We are more accountable to key performance indicators and things such as that. There is a sense that our bosses are also under the thumb and watching us. Yes, it is exhausting. He goes on, "I try to stay on top of things, but I find myself getting irritated when they ask for more. And sometimes I even argue back." Look, there is nothing wrong with challenging decisions of management. Of course, it does demand politeness and a subtlety in the way that you approach it. You use the word argue. I suggest that maybe there's an opportunity there to, at least in therapy, we would talk about how that exactly plays out. Give me an example of how it went down. And perhaps there's an opportunity there to fine-tune the way in which you are challenging your bosses, or at least trying to understand what it is that they're asking of you. I even argue back, which I know doesn't do me any favors. Absolutely it doesn't. It's just going to put people's defenses up, to be honest with you, and it doesn't matter whether they're your boss or a colleague or whatever else. It's going to make them very defensive, and with that comes an emotional position that's very hard to then go on and have a logical discussion over. It's almost like I'm always on edge, like I need to prove something to them. Okay, well, maybe there's a misalignment in the expectations around the job. As I say, it would be great to know how long you were there. When was the last time you had a performance meeting? When was the last time you sat down and actually talked about expectations in the job? But I'm not even sure anymore. I guess I want them to see that I'm capable, that I can handle it all, but it seems like I'm fighting a losing battle. And the more I push, the more I feel like I'm just getting in my own way. That's an interesting statement. The fact that you feel like you're getting in your own way. I really feel like there's something behind that. I really do. It goes on. It's a similar story at home too. Okay, this is interesting. I love my kids, but I really get frustrated with them sometimes when they don't follow rules or mess up. I feel this pressure to make sure they get it right, and I end up snapping at them more than I'd like to. I don't want to be hard on them, but it's almost automatic. Now, this is interesting when you say it's almost automatic, because this suggests that it is behavior that you have inherited. It suggests to me, and this is where I would start to ask about. In fact, you actually do it right. The next sentence is exactly what you say. I think back to my own childhood, and it's a bit of a blur, but I remember my dad always having, this is exactly where I was going to go with this, having really high expectations of me. He was strict and didn't really show much emotion unless it was disappointment. Okay, I don't think he ever told me outright that I was good enough. Okay, well, you've answered the question here, because I was going to say what you had said up to that point. One of the first things we would look at is how you have acquired these expectations of your kids. particularly the kids, and why you feel it necessary to argue back when you're being challenged at work. These are very absolute kind of positions. There's no real flexibility in the way that you're describing them. But you say here that you describe the relationship with your dad, and that is really interesting, because I'm going to go out on a limb here and ask whether he was a real authoritarian sort of figure in your life. And I'd really love to know what he did for a job. Was he involved in the military in any way? Was he a teacher, or some job that had a position of authority which spanned a lot of people? Did he have a lot of people under him, and therefore had to just be an authority figure and not really consider each person individually? This is really interesting, because the authoritarian father is one that just imposes rules and regulations, but doesn't really give you any reason as to why they exist. They just exist, and you have to follow those rules on blind faith, and you just do it. And we've talked about this in previous videos, where we are a product of our relationships that go all the way back to childhood, and particularly in those formative years between the ages of 5 and 10. We are absorbing so much, and by the time we get to 10 or 11 or 12 years old, we are essentially the person we're going to be for the rest of our lives. You can see it in kids. They get to this point emotionally where they have acquired the patterns and the way in which to deal with so much, and that sticks. That absolutely sticks. All we do is we just pile on our knowledge on top of that, but it doesn't really affect that behavior as much as it does from what we learnt back then. So with that in mind, let's carry on. We say he was strict and didn't show any emotion unless it was disappointment. I don't think he ever told me outright that I was good enough, but that's how it felt. So you never measured up to his expectations. And certainly with an authoritarian parent, particularly a father, it would be very difficult to measure up. It's never good enough. There is no sense of. Well, actually, I'll finish what you've written here, and then we'll come back to this. Whether it was sports or school, just the way I handle myself, there was always this unspoken pressure to do better, to be better. Now that I'm a dad myself, I'm starting to wonder if I've picked up some of those habits. I think you probably have. I think you definitely have. I never thought of myself as being like my father, but I catch myself acting the way he did, pushing my kids to be their best and getting upset if they fall short. Well, of course you do. And look, this is normal in that we take these blueprints from our parents, but the challenge is seeing that we've only seen one side of our parents. We've only seen what they let us see. And particularly, and we see this a lot with authoritarian parents who lay down the law, and that's the way it is. Like, this is their expectation, and that's it. There's no room for discussion. There's no flexibility. That's just the expectation. But we see this quite a bit is that we only see that side of them. They are very, very guarded in that they really raise us under this blanket of expectation, and that's it. We don't really see much of the actual person as they exist outside of this regimented sort of style that they have of raising you, and we don't get to see them as a softer person, a more maybe loving person, a kinder person. We don't get to see much of the relationship that our parents had between each other. We don't get to see that stuff. So we only end up really assimilating the very, very rigid authoritarian nature of our parents. He goes on to say, I'm not sure if it's the right way to parent, but I honestly don't know any other way. Okay. Now, if you were in a therapy session, this would be an opportunity for us to look at the different parenting styles and to discuss the pros and cons of them. There are styles that are very, very permissive, very authoritarian. They sit in the middle where they are authoritative. but they give a little bit of autonomy or degrees of autonomy to the kids to feel like they're actually in control of themselves and to build that sense of control. But it really sounds like this is an authoritarian style of parenting. And yes, there are other ways. Absolutely, there are other ways of doing things. It's like there's a voice in my head saying that if they don't learn how, they'll struggle later in life. But then I wonder if I'm being too hard on them, whether it's making things worse for everyone. Well, what you're doing is you're simply just propagating, if you don't mind me using that word, the way in which you were parented onto you and then passing that on to your kids. And without any change or flexibility in that, it's just going to be passed on by generation by generation by generation. That's literally how that will work. Now, it's interesting that you say that you never knew whether you were good enough. So this is one of the aspects of authoritarian parenting that opens the door to self-esteem problems. Now, you haven't actually alluded to self-esteem, but you do have some self-doubt around hitting targets and things when it comes to work. And I wonder whether that's the beginnings of this, because with an authoritarian parent, you're just told what to do and that's it. You don't learn where the line is, like what is acceptable behavior other than just to do what you were told, right? So in terms of being autonomous, and that is like making decisions for yourself, you don't really have a reference other than what this authority figure over you is telling you should do. And if there's no upper limit, like if you're never good enough, then how do you know that you're performing at an acceptable level? And you say this here when you're talking about the work. That even though you're hitting targets, even though you're actually hitting targets, you feel like they're constantly watching and waiting you to slip up. So you can see there is a real distinct correlation between the way that you're describing the expectations around work and the expectations placed on you by an authority figure. Okay, the authority figure is your bosses, and I would suggest that you're having a similar relationship with your kids, as you're having with the authority figures, or rather, your kids are having a similar relationship with you as you are having with your current authority figures in your life. I'd be interested to know if your father is still alive and what sort of influence he has on you. But look, even if he's not, he will exert a force on you that will be the same whether he was alive or has passed, because those expectations are imprinted on you and they are part of who you are. And without recognizing those, then you'll just continue to do the same thing over and over again. But we can see a definite correlation between the work aspect and the way in which you are now working with your kids. I never thought of myself as being a father, but I catch myself acting the same way, pushing the kids to be their best. I'm not sure if this is the right way to parent, but I honestly don't know another way. Sorry, we did say that, didn't we? It's like there's a voice in my head saying that if I don't know how to learn, they'll struggle, and we did cover that. Okay, and he goes on to talk about his wife. My wife has mentioned a few times that I seem distant or stressed, but I've always brushed it off. We don't talk about it much, though. She's great, and I know she's there for me, but when it comes to talking about how I'm feeling, I just can't do it. Of course you can't. Did you ever have that dialogue with your parents, particularly with your father? Did you ever talk about how you're feeling, or was it just like that sort of classic, kids should be seen and not heard kind of thing, where you were just expected just to do what you were told and that's it? These feelings that you're having about authority, about talking about how you feel, are very much a result of an authoritarian parenting style. And I encourage you to look that up. We won't go into it too much detail here, but go and have a look at it, or at least do a search for parenting styles and take a look at authoritarian and authoritative. They are distinctly different. One has a tremendous advantage over the other, but take a look at them, because I really think that it might strike a chord with you. I just can't do it. It's not that I don't want to, I just don't know where to begin. Well, that's because you haven't had the experience. Okay, you haven't been taught how to be autonomous and to, look, I hesitate to use this phrase, but think for yourself, because you've always had someone telling you exactly what you should do. Growing up, my dad wasn't one for showing or talking about emotions. And I guess that rubbed off on me, absolutely. Even now, when my wife brings up anything emotional, I sit down and change the subject. Well, that's because you're not equipped to deal with the subject matter. That's very normal. I know it's not helping our relationship, but it's like I don't know how to express what's going on inside. This is where, if you see a counselor or a therapist, they will give you the opportunity to start to express yourself in a very, very safe, confidential environment. You can experiment with using your own language and talking without fear of being judged. And it is a good place to practice those skills, or at least to develop the beginnings of those skills. You can do it. It's simply the fact that you've never had the tools in which to do it, and you certainly haven't had any practice that enables you to hone those skills. I've always been told, just get on with it. Yep, just get on with it, boy. And that's what I've done for most of my life. But now I'm starting to wonder if it's part of the problem. I would suggest that it is part of the problem. There is a constant feeling of not measuring up, and I don't know where it's coming from, whether it's at home or work. I feel like it's always chasing some impossible standard. Yes, absolutely. You're chasing a performance expectation that is ever increasing. It's never good enough. And this is probably, your father probably grew up in a similar environment as well. He probably, his father, your grandfather, probably worked exactly the same way. It's like you always need to be improving yourself. You always need to be working hard, and there's no reason to sit on your laurels, all those sort of things that people would say to you to try and keep pushing yourself. But the byproduct of that is that you don't know where that line is. You can't look at yourself and go, okay, I am doing good enough. Now you say back up here that you're hitting targets with work. Okay, that's a metric you can measure. But I'm talking about emotionally knowing what's good enough. The same thing with the relationship. What am I putting in? Where is the line? Where should I be? It's very, very vague, because you've never been allowed to establish the line and work the line for yourself. There's a line below the line. You need to lift your game. If you're above the line, you're doing well. Good on you. Okay, there's always room for improvement, but you know where that expectation is, and you know how to regulate yourself according to that. But with an authoritarian parenting style, and particularly with an authoritarian father, that line is not evident. Okay, it's very similar with permissive parenting as well. That's another style, and it could actually be permissive parenting in this, right? It could be one of the two. I'm just having a think now that could be, but it really leads me to think about authoritarian parenting style. But have a look at permissive. It may be that you had a permissive mother to balance out your father, and then there could be something in that really just left an enormous grey area for you. He goes on to say here, I keep pushing myself harder and harder. The more I try to succeed, the more anxious and frustrated I become. That's because you don't know where the line is. You don't know what's good enough. Of course it's frustrating. I look at other men who seem calm and in control and wonder why I can't be like that. Why can't I just let things go and enjoy life without feeling like I'm falling short all the time? The answer is in what we've just talked about. The answer is in you have literally been trained and conditioned to know no upper limit. You just need to keep doing. Nothing's good enough. Not even the people in your life, not even your own kids. And that should ring alarm bells. I believe it has. I think that has rung alarm bells for you in here. But the thing to realize is that the longer you keep doing this automatically, the more you're simply going to imprint yourself on your kids, and they will grow up asking these same questions that you've got here. You go here again. I think my father had a lot to do with this. Yes. I think we're literally on the same page here. He was always pushing me to be the best at everything, but I never felt like I lived up to his expectations. Okay, you've repeated yourself there, but in the fact that you've repeated yourself, I think you've made a real poignant point. Even now, as an adult, I can't seem to shake the feeling that I'm not good enough, and it's affecting how I deal with people around me. Yes, absolutely. I don't want to make excuses. But it's like I'm carrying this invisible weight on my shoulders for as long as I can remember, and it's getting heavier. Yes, it will. It will get heavier unless you deal with it. Because particularly as you get older, as guys get older, we start reflecting more. We start looking at ourselves. We start seeing those inadequacies. We start seeing that gap. We talked about the gap before, the gap between where you see yourself and where you think you should be. And the broader that gap, the more unhappiness will fall into that gap. And that's probably the thing that's giving you that sense of heaviness. I guess what I'm really asking is, I just need to make sense of this all. I don't know if there's something I'm missing or if I'm just overthinking things. Even the process of overthinking can be a product of this parenting style. But I'm tired of feeling like this. I'm stuck in the same old loop. I want to be a better husband, a better father, someone who can actually relax and enjoy life, but I'm not sure how to get there. Any advice you can offer would be appreciated. Thanks for taking the time to read this. This is... without obviously sitting down and talking to you and bringing out some examples, I'd love to hear some actual examples. This is one of the things that I think we would role play a little bit, and we just get particularly the work thing, because I think the work relationship is indicative of how you view authority, and how you view authority will paint that picture of your relationship, particularly with your father in your life, and your mother too. Let's not discount mother on the side of it, but you have pointed to your father a lot in this letter. You haven't mentioned your mother at all. I'm thinking, my guess would be that maybe she was very permissive, or she was out of the picture, or maybe she was under the same spell that the rest of the family were. You had a very authoritarian father, and maybe he controlled your mother as well in that same way. Maybe it was a very controlling relationship. But it would be really interesting to explore that with you, and to understand the nature of what happens. I mean, boys often will learn to suppress their emotions, because it's seen to be vulnerable, or it's a weakness. And in a very male-dominated environment where the expectation is just to be stoic and strong, having emotions is discouraged, unfortunately. And you've said in the letter that this is an area where you feel out of your depth with your wife, just talking about things. And I would suggest to you that when you do, you feel weak, or you feel embarrassed, and you feel like you simply shouldn't be there. Maybe you would feel like your father's hovering off here. And again, I would love to know if he's still around and how he exerts that pressure on you. But even without him here physically, he's over your shoulder, and he's telling you that this is a sign of weakness. You need to be strong. You need to tell people how it is, and they need to fall into line in the world that you are managing. Constant criticism from an authoritarian father, it can lead to chronic self-doubt. Absolutely chronic self-doubt, because you haven't had the opportunity to be autonomous and to do those things for yourself. Take a look at the difference between authoritarian and authoritative parenting styles, and that will explain in detail where I am right now in response to this. And I think it will give you some visibility, or some awareness over how your father is controlling you now. My suggestion to you is to acknowledge that, and you kind of have in this sense. But what you need to do is apply that awareness to yourself and go, that's my father. That's my father talking right there. It's not me. Now, obviously, it's you reacting to that, and there is a necessity to be responsible for the way that you're acting. But by the same token, it's recognizing where that influence is coming from and going, that's not actually coming from me. It's coming from my father. It's coming from me having observed him, and I'm just simply behaving the same way he would have, without any rhyme nor reason. I'm just doing it. And therein lies your sense of losing control over this, because you're just doing what you think your father would have done, and there's no real reason to it, and you have a sense of the fact you're not in control, and this will cause you to argue back, because the arguing position is not a is not a smart position to be in. It doesn't show that you're really thinking about the situation and presenting a counter argument that can lead to a healthy conversation about work. The argument is simply going, no, this is how it is, and that's that. And as I said before, when we read that bit about work, it's making people incredibly defensive. It's going to put you at odds with the people that are simply trying to manage you. Okay, they're simply trying to manage you. Now, maybe they are doing it in a manner that is triggering for you. That's a possibility. Or maybe they're just being the boss that any other person would be, with, you know, KPIs and expectations and etc. But you say here that you're meeting targets. You say that you're actually achieving the job, but you feel like you're constantly being watched. Okay, I would have to challenge you on that. Are you? And let's have some examples of where you think you're actually being watched that is disproportionate to how anyone else would be watched in the workplace. Is it that sense, that sort of sense you have that someone's sitting over your shoulder, your dad, watching you and judging every single thing that you do? Are you reverting back to that childhood persona that you had, in that where you just feel like you're being watched? And that's a very common place to be. It's a default position. It's where you learnt all of this from, and it's a place that you will go back to in an instant. So we would look at that. I'd be really interested to know whether you feel like a child again, really. And I know this is an emotional discussion. We're not going to have this on day one, but it will be a place to get to. Is it a feeling that you have? Is there some correlation between how you feel when you think you're being watched and when you were a kid and you felt like your father was onto you the whole time? You say you want them to see that you're capable. Of course, as a kid you do. You want your dad to be proud of you. But it sounds like he never actually expressed that. So if he never expressed the fact that he was proud of you, then how do you ever know, whether he was? And, the doubt is there. This feeds into self-esteem problems, and I think you know where this is taking you. It's a very well-written letter. I think you've hit a number of key points on here. My advice to you is to look at authoritarian parenting, particularly from a male perspective. This is very indicative of a behavior or a style that is just imprinted from generation to generation, because it doesn't allow autonomy or much autonomy in the thinking or the process, the emotional response. It's just the way it is, and it's the one parenting style that just replicates itself generation after generation. You can also maybe, like, you haven't put it here, but I'll be interested to know how you, and I wonder whether there's a clue in the fact you haven't alluded to any real female influence in your life, because having a very authoritarian father can shape the attitude you have to, well, of course you mentioned your wife, but in passing, you just say that she's mentioned it a few times and you brushed it off. So, do you only recognize males in authority as those people that you should listen to? Valid question. And I think it's a tough question. Do you respect men in authority more than you do women? Is this a problem? Is this a problem in the workplace? And I'd be interested to know the people that are senior to you in your workplace, are they men or women? But I think what I'm asking there is, like, do you have the same respect for women that you do for men because of this way that you were brought up? Don't deny who you were as a young kid, a young boy, between the ages of 8 and 11 or 12, because those are the years when your father has the most influence on you, and that influence is something that sticks with you. It stays. It makes you the person who you are inside, and the best thing we can do is become aware of that, where it's coming from, and identify it and see it and go, not this time, Dad, I'm good, right? And build that independence and that autonomy. Hey, thanks for your letter. It's great to get this. This is a thing that a lot of men struggle with. particularly of our generation, because our fathers and their fathers were, they went through hard times. And they didn't have a lot of support, and they did what they had to do. And a lot of them were, a product of the war, product of depressions, product of those things where you just had to be extremely stoic and just say, this is how it is, this is how it gets done. And also, male behavior was very different back then. Things have changed a lot. Therein lies another challenge for another day, believe me. But thank you for your letter, and I hope you've gotten something out of that today. If you have gotten something out of listening to this letter today, then we'd appreciate a like on the channel. It really makes a difference to understand that you have gotten something out of this. And also subscribe, and you will get notified when we put something new up. If you'd like to write in, I would encourage you to write in. There is an email address on our channel, YouTube channel description, and you can just fire off an email. What we normally do is we have a cursory read of the letter, and if it fits within our ballpark of therapies that we deal with in the clinic, then we will give it a second read live, unedited, which is what we've just done. This is an unedited read, a second read of the letter, and try to give you some insights based on what it is you have written. Details such as ages and things like that we've talked about in this through reading this letter are always good to know. Age is a great thing to know. It just paints a clearer picture of where people are at, and that's one of the first questions that we would normally ask is, how old are your kids? How old are you? How old is your wife? How long have you been married? That sort of time dynamic does give us a lot of information. So have a think about that if you want to write in. But until then, this has been the MindStrong Edge.